This house is for me and my mother to live in after all. You should get a divorce and leave.
When the new single-family house was completed, my husband John sneered at me and uttered unbelievable words. My mother-in-law, who was watching nearby, mocked me in the same way as he did. I won't forgive them. I'm determined to make them experience hell on earth. With that thought in mind, I replied casually with an "okay," signed the divorce papers, and immediately contacted someone. My name is Hannah Smith, a 35-year-old plastic surgeon. Right now, in front of me, my husband John Smith is kneeling and begging for forgiveness. His pitiful display is quite pathetic and oddly comical to watch. How did we end up in this situation? To explain the sequence of events, John and I are newlyweds in our first year of marriage. However, if you consider our dating history, we've been together for about 3 years. We both felt it was time to settle down, given our ages, so we got married. But that's when the incident occurred. My mother had an accident and suffered a severe lower body injury. She lives alone, and my father passed away earlier, so there was no one nearby to take care of her. Despite the fact that it might be an inconvenience for John so early in our marriage, I suggested building an accessible new home and living together. I was prepared to hear him suggest divorce. After all, who would willingly choose to live together so soon after getting married? Even if you have a good relationship with your partner's family, it's still a daunting prospect. John had no prior connection with my mother, so I thought he would surely be reluctant. However, to my surprise, he readily accepted this proposal without hesitation.
Marriage is about becoming a part of each other's families. Taking care of family is a child's duty, isn't it? It's only natural.
I couldn't hide my surprise as John answered with a bright smile. It was typical of him. He might not refuse, but he would likely express a complaint or two. From my perspective, I had been thinking that it was necessary to have this conversation, even if he voiced some grievances. His response was unexpected, leaving me momentarily speechless. Seeing me like that, John tilted his head curiously and asked what was wrong. I, in a fluster, expressed my gratitude to him for agreeing. When I conveyed this to my mother at home, she also expressed her thanks to him. Soon after that, we began considering the house, and in the meantime, my mother made arrangements for her care in a nursing facility. Whether we were renting or building a house, we needed a place to take care of my mother until then. I quickly took care of the necessary procedures, and with the help of acquaintances, my mother smoothly transitioned into the facility. Then, we promptly went to talk to a real estate company, and given our savings, the prospect of building a house looked promising relatively quickly. However, a problem arose here. When the discussion turned to how the property should be registered, for some reason, John chuckled and declined the proposal of having it in both our names.
You see, I don't make much income, and if it's not proportionate to the size of the burden, it might be mistaken as a gift, and we could end up paying taxes on it. That would be troublesome, and I'm fine with Hannah's name alone on it. I haven't managed to save up much either.
John's job was in manufacturing as a subcontractor for a major electrical company. It was not only low-paying but also physically demanding work. Despite the fact that it resembled the very definition of a black company, in today's terms, he adamantly refused to consider changing jobs. I had shown him job listings multiple times, suggesting that it would be better for his future to work somewhere else than to continue working in such conditions. However, he remained resolute in his refusal. He insisted that he didn't want to quit his current job because he loved it and was unwilling to listen to my reasoning. Personally, I think having John's name on it would provide some peace of mind in case something happens to me in the future. But what about when I'm gone? John seems like he wouldn't even know how to change the name on the property, so wouldn't it be better to have it in both our names so that the necessary procedures can be easily handled? I've known he's been somewhat clueless about the world ever since we started dating. His lack of knowledge led to some unconventional behaviors, but he's someone who genuinely cares about his surroundings and his family. He puts his all into everything, to the extent that he's willing to work at a company like that, even if it means sacrificing himself. I know him as the type of person who lives straightforwardly. I married him, flaws and all, because of that. I believed in him as someone who values others more than his shortcomings. That's why I was able to love him. My dear husband, for such a trivial reason, is rejecting my proposal. It's hard to accept. Even if it makes him uncomfortable, the way he's handling this is disrespectful towards me, his wife. I've placed my trust in him wholeheartedly. That's why, at first, I didn't feel uneasy about his continuous refusal regarding the property's name. Rather, it was from this point forward that I started sensing something was amiss. Usually, he would, albeit reluctantly, consider my opinions and agree, saying, "I'm sorry, if that's what you want." But for some reason, he absolutely refuses to budge on the matter of the property's name. He's insistent on it being solely in his name, and it's clear that something is off. There must be another reason for him to be this obstinate. With this in mind, for the first time since we got married, I began to question him, as if interrogating him. "John, let's stop this pointless argument. Do you really think you can keep hiding it like this?"
Huh.
Just as I suspected. Beads of sweat formed on John's forehead, an unusual amount, and his eyes darted from side to side, unable to conceal his unease. He's not one to lie, so even my probing had prompted a genuine reaction from him. This was why he rarely ever lied in front of me, probably because he expected to be caught if he did. "You thought I hadn't figured it out?" With a further gentle push, it seemed John had resigned himself to it and began sharing the shocking truth.
"Well, Hannah, you've got it all figured out, haven't you? When I was younger, I got addicted to gambling, and my parents didn't have a lot of money. I had no way of repaying my debts, so that seemed like the only option. That's why I can't take out a loan, and I ended up on the financial institution's blacklist due to excessive delays in payments. I've been keeping it a secret all this time because I was afraid you'd find out and divorce me. I'm sorry. I should have talked to you about it before we got married."
I couldn't help but feel like saying, "Wait," as I listened to the content of the story. I had no choice but to do that because I couldn't repay my debt, essentially meant. "You couldn't possibly have filed for bankruptcy, could you?" Upon hearing those words, John looked surprised and stared at me as if wondering what I meant.
"You know everything, don't you?"
"I just caught on because your behavior was so strange. But more importantly, what's this about? You didn't tell me you filed for bankruptcy before we got married, did you?" John, realizing he had fallen for my trick, turned pale. Panicked by the fact that everything was exposed, he knelt and clung to me, desperately seeking forgiveness, even grabbing onto my ankles. John was afraid of losing me by telling the truth. When I looked into his eyes as he confessed this, it seemed like he was genuinely terrified, and I couldn't bring myself to dismiss him. He had his own fears of me leaving him. His agreement to live with my parents may have stemmed from this guilt he felt. Despite the shock I felt upon learning this, he willingly accepted something that most people would probably dislike, living with their in-laws. It took time, but I eventually accepted John's past and forgave him for keeping secrets. Of course, I didn't hold back on complaining during that time, but in the end, I believed his words when he said there was nothing else hidden and didn't pretend to get a divorce. However, at that time, I didn't even realize that this decision was actually a mistake. I decided to have the property solely in my name, with my mother's name as the guarantor. My mother had been urging us to divorce after hearing about John's situation, but when I told her about his willingness to live together, she was left speechless.
"If that makes you happy, I have no right to interfere."
Perhaps she thought she shouldn't interfere too much since we would be living under her care. Everyone was looking forward to the completion of the newly built house where my mother and I would live together. After all, despite everything, it was the first time I would be living with John after our marriage. There was no way not to be excited. However, what awaited us in reality was not the sweet newlywed life, but John's terrifying plan. One holiday, my mother-in-law invited us, and it was going to be a dinner with her today. Since John had mentioned wanting to discuss the new house with her, we had decided to have dinner together as the three of us.
"You've been through a lot, dear. I'm sorry I couldn't do anything during that time."
My mother-in-law is a very refined person who has always treated me like her own daughter. It's unclear whether she knew about John's bankruptcy, but I didn't want to discuss it and potentially strain their parent-child relationship. So, during this dinner, I explained that I had savings and wanted to allocate John's money for living expenses, which is why we decided to build the house solely in my name.
"I'm sorry for always burdening you, Hannah, with my low income. At least let me take care of the meals here as a mother. I may not have much income either, so I can't do much, but you can always rely on me."
I had always been grateful for the warmth of my kind-hearted mother-in-law who looked at me so gently as she spoke. We had a pleasant dinner, and when I got up from the table to use the restroom, it happened. After I finished and returned to the room, I could hear the serious conversation between the two of them.
"It went well, John. Once that house is completed, it won't be long before we, mother and son, can live together."
I was worried about what would happen if my bankruptcy was exposed, but she's so naive that it was a breeze. As far as I'm concerned, once I overcome the loan and the property name issue, she's completely taken care of.
A son is a valuable possession, after all. I wanted a barrier-free house too, so it's perfect. It's like a dream to be able to live in a new house.
Upon hearing the content of their conversation, my thoughts came to a halt. I couldn't even comprehend what the two of them were saying. It was beyond my understanding.
Honestly, that old hag isn't my type at all. I used her because she had money, and she fell for me, so I've been taking advantage of her. Lately, there's this young and cute girl at work who's been hitting on me. I've been thinking about switching to her once the house is built.
Unbelievable words reached my ears, and I was frozen in place. From the beginning, John had only been after my money and the house, and he never cared about me in the slightest. In fact, he intended to use me conveniently and discard me once he was done.
But that poor girl, too. If she finds out John married her for money, she might faint in shock.
The moment I realized that my mother-in-law was also complicit in this, all the gratitude I had felt towards her vanished in an instant, replaced by hatred welling up inside me. Unforgivable. To think that they only saw me as a source of money. I couldn't forgive their intention to use me like that. Fueled by anger reaching its peak, I discreetly made a call on my phone, determined to seek revenge against John and them. I would show them hell. I would make them experience a living hell. Concealing my feelings of hatred, I spent the rest of the day with them as if nothing had happened. And finally, it was the long-awaited unveiling of our new single-family home. Both John and I looked up at our completed house, wearing satisfied smiles. John believed he could take over this house, while I believed I could finally show him hell. We both smiled for entirely different reasons, and he remained oblivious to the true nature of my smile. What a foolish pair they were. If only they hadn't thought about such things, we could have avoided this situation. While thinking about this, I couldn't help but pity John and his mother. Of course, my mother-in-law was also present, putting on a fake performance, and I eagerly awaited the words they would say to me.
Now that we have this impressive house, Hannah, there's something important I want to discuss.
As the three of us explored the new house, John appeared excited and brought up that conversation. I didn't show my anticipation, but I turned toward him with a poker face, as if saying, "I've been waiting." "What's going on?" "Important talk, you say?" I must have had a bewildered expression on my face as I stared at him, wondering what was going on. At that moment, John and my mother-in-law both wore wicked smiles as they hit me with those words.
This house is meant for me and my mother after all. You should get a divorce and leave.
They likely anticipated my surprise and panic. However, in the next moment, I beamed at them and handed over the divorce papers. "Sure. Then please sign this. Afterward, I'll submit it to the city hall. To my unexpected calm response, both of them instead showed surprised expressions and revealed their confusion, seemingly taken aback.
Why are you so composed? And why a divorce form?
Oh, you didn't know? It's common sense to prepare a divorce form when you get married. I saw it on TV the other day. I carry one with me just in case something happens. Turns out, it was a good idea to have it ready. I didn't expect to need it so soon. Glad I studied up on it from TV, right? With a playful tone, I handed them the divorce papers, which already had my signature on them. They might have found it suspicious, but for both of them, me agreeing to divorce was quite convenient. Without any suspicion, they signed the divorce papers I provided and handed them back to me with smug expressions. So, with this, the deal is done, right? Thanks for everything up until now. Don't ever get involved with me again. With a beaming smile and a cheerful farewell, it was as if John was the one delivering the lines as he responded.
Don't regret leaving the house.
Little did they know that those words would come back to haunt them. 3 days later, in the early morning hours, my phone received a barrage of calls from an unknown number. As I happened to have a day off and was trying to enjoy a peaceful sleep, these calls were extremely annoying. Irritated, I picked up the call, only to be met with John's shouting echoing in my ears.
Hannah, what the hell have you done? Explain the situation.
His tone was rough and unlike anything I had ever heard from him, fueling my growing sense of disgust. Yuri being quite noisy this early in the morning. I have no idea what you're talking about, and I distinctly recall telling you not to have anything to do with me ever again, I retorted.
Your feelings don't matter, explain the situation. The bank keeps calling and won't stop. John demanded, his voice filled with frustration.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I reported the divorce to both the bank and the real estate company, I replied casually. I got up, scratching my head in response to John's voice echoing in my head, and headed to the kitchen for a cup of coffee. My mother, who had already awakened, was seated at the dining table in her wheelchair, pouring a warm cup of coffee for me.
So, why am I getting these calls at my end then?
Of course. The bank is probably about your car, and the real estate company is selling that house, so they're definitely calling to urge you to leave, aren't they?
Hey, didn't you still owe payments on that car?
Upon hearing my story, John was shocked, and his voice trembled with surprise. Hearing his reaction, I couldn't help but find his response even more favorable than I had imagined, and I almost spilled my coffee in surprise. Of course. Why should I, the one who got divorced, have to pay for your new car?
Even after the divorce, I bought that car on the day we had dinner with my mom, and I had already made the payments before the divorce.
It's not surprising that John was upset. In fact, when it came to living with my mother, John had requested a car to assist with her care. During our discussions about choosing a home, he mentioned finding a good job about a 15-minute drive from the new house. He wanted to commute there by car and, as a result, proposed that I purchase a car for him.
It's a car we'll use for your mom's care as well, so buying a new one would be more reliable than a used car, don't you think?
He had been discussing this with me, mentioning the purchase of a car worth nearly 20 million yen. Considering that we might have to transport my mother, having a new car does indeed provide a sense of security compared to using someone else's bath. Initially, I had no suspicions and went along with the idea. However, on the day of that dinner, they were loudly discussing this matter and revealing their reasons.
It's a car that can be used for caregiving, so how about selling it as a used car for a decent price? We can split the cost between me and my mother. I can use it to buy gifts for the girl at my workplace, and my mother can get herself a branded handbag. I can trick her into buying that car for sure.
Unaware that I was listening outside the room, John and his mother were laughing loudly as they discussed their plans. Being a frugal person from a young age, I had saved up over 10 million yen, and I could easily fulfill John's request. However, who would agree to such a scheme after hearing this kind of conversation? Here, I decided to take action to strike back. First, I agreed to John's new car purchase and even went with him to the car dealership. We made the purchase agreement with me being responsible for the payments, and we signed the contract 2 months before the completion of the new house. After that, I left his bank account with no deposits whatsoever. Since we had a deal with a shop that allowed buying without a down payment, the bank started hounding John when no withdrawals were made even after waiting for a month from the first month. John, who was completely oblivious and had left everything to me, must have panicked for sure. He hadn't even bothered to check his bank book properly and had left it alone, expecting me to handle everything. His carelessness ended up becoming a noose around his neck. John, upon realizing this fact, is probably now as white as a sheet, with all the blood drained from his face, and his thoughts completely stopped, unable to come up with any retort. John seemed to be at a loss for words. All that could be heard were sounds like, and, emanating from him in a pitiful manner. By the way, that house has already been sold, and we've found a buyer, so you'll need to vacate within a week, or you'll be forcibly evicted, I added.
Huh.
As I delivered the shocking news, seemingly pushing him further, John snapped back to reality and let out a loud, startled exclamation. It's only natural. Why would you think someone can just keep squatting in a house that's in my name forever? Neither my mother nor I are living there, it's an unnecessary house, so selling it is a given. Fortunately, the real estate agency is run by an acquaintance of mine, the owner. They were happy to help find a buyer, and it seems they found one quickly. The contract is already signed, and the money has been transferred. So, I suggest you move out of that house promptly. If you don't, it might lead to a police report for trespassing. Are you okay with that? Perhaps he realized that I had the upper hand, as John looked completely cornered. Even without seeing his face, I could tell his expression from his tone of voice. It was as if he were saying he had been thoroughly trapped. Too bad, isn't it? Your plan to take over the new house has failed miserably. I'm feeling really good about getting more than enough in return compared to the alimony from the divorce. Both you and your mother turned out to be even more despicable than I could have imagined, and I seriously regret my judgment of character.
Well, what makes you think you can get away with something like this? Making such a high-handed move without family consent. Are you even human anymore?
A person like you, trying to take advantage of others and enjoy the benefits, then acting like a victim, you're nothing but scum. Upon hearing John's retort, my anger reached its peak, and I proceeded to deliver even more cruel truths to him. The wounds my mother and I carry in our hearts are nothing compared to what you've done. I'll make sure you learn firsthand what happens when you toy with people's emotions, I said. Just as I delivered my words, the doorbell of his house chimed with perfect timing. He remained on the call while answering the intercom. An irritated John, clearly annoyed by the interruption, went to attend to the visitor. However, upon seeing the person on the intercom, John let out a small scream.
Gr Grandpa. Why is Grandpa here?
There, on the intercom, was my mother-in-law's father, and it seemed like my grandfather-in-law had a stern expression, as John and my mother-in-law's voices were filled with fear.
I know you're in there. Open this door.
The voice of my paternal grandfather was low, tinged with anger, and my mother responded with fear in her voice.
Why are you here, Dad? You shouldn't know about this house.
Just open the door. I've heard everything from Hannah. I received a call from Hannah 3 days ago. She told me everything, from the reason for the divorce to how it all unfolded.
After submitting the divorce papers to the city hall, I had contacted my two adversaries, my grandfather-in-law in particular. He was a strict individual who had no tolerance for those who strayed from the path of righteousness. He had disowned my mother-in-law as well for her wayward life after her divorce from my father-in-law. However, since my husband John was his grandson and had committed no wrongdoing, we had paid a visit to my grandfather-in-law when we got married.
I never would have imagined that my own daughter and grandson would be involved in such a disgraceful matter. Perhaps it was a mistake for me to disown that lad. Hannah, I'm truly sorry.
Grandfather-in-law was the chairman of a major car manufacturer and a well-known influential figure in the area. In the past, he had undergone surgery at our plastic surgery clinic for a burn accident, so we were somewhat familiar with each other. When I told my grandfather-in-law about this situation, he became visibly angry and headed straight to where my mother-in-law and John were.
I'll take responsibility for handling this situation with these two. Hannah, you and your mother have been greatly inconvenienced by all of this. Have you found a place to live yet? As an apology for this, would you let me cover the expenses? Tell me where you'd like to live, and I'll purchase it as a gift. Of course, for my foolish daughter and grandson, I'll make sure they earn and transfer the apology fee to you. I don't expect you to forgive us with just an apology, but I hope to make things right for all of you in your own way. I'll ensure they follow through with it.
For my mother-in-law and John, it was truly a living hell. There was no escaping their grandfather right in front of them, and they found themselves in a situation where his strict management of their lives was a better option than being disowned. And so, with the arrival of my grandfather-in-law, this chapter of the story came to a close. We took advantage of his offer, and my mother and I decided to build a new, barrier-free single-family home in my mother's hometown. With the proceeds from the sale of the previous new house, we were able to fully pay off the expenses, and my mother and I embarked on a new life together, just the two of us. Since then, John and his mother were made to work tirelessly under my grandfather-in-law's supervision, from morning till night. John, as part of his punishment, started a job with a contract that cut his salary by 60% for a year. They lived in a rundown company housing, and my mother-in-law was subjected to the same treatment. As per my grandfather-in-law's declaration, John and his mother sent monthly settlement payments to me as agreed, and it seemed that they had learned their lesson after experiencing such a harsh ordeal. And so, my mother and I were able to regain a peaceful life. She enjoys her daily life while using daycare services. As for me, I continue to enjoy my work and love life, always by my mother's side, sharing laughter and happiness together.